This week, I will not make that promise, given that my track record in these matters. My daughter was giving me a hard time. I said that we had about 4 or 5 verses to go, and she said, well, good, it's another 6 weeks for you in Ecclesiastes. So, yeah, hopefully not that bad. But before we begin the beginning of the end of Ecclesiastes, we'll pause for a moment. We'll say a prayer, then we'll read the last few verses, and then we'll talk about them. So, if you would pray with me, please. Father in heaven, we thank you for this day. We are grateful to you, Father, for this time that we have with one another, the opportunity to study from your word. We ask that you would bless us as we do so, that we may be able to discern the wisdom that is there and have the strength and the courage, as well as the knowledge to apply it to our lives, so that we can lead lives that are more closely in accordance with your will, that we can lead lives that bring you glory and honor as you so deserve. Father, we are thankful for all that you have done for us, all the gifts and blessings you bestow, all the things you continue to do. But we are most thankful that you sent your Son, Jesus. We are thankful for his sacrifice in our behalf, and we pray these things in Jesus' name. All right, so we got to verse 9. There are 14 verses. So we'll see. We'll see what we can do here. So we'll read the last little section, and then we'll talk about it here. So beginning in verse 9 of chapter 12 of Ecclesiastes, and more than being wise, Kohelet still taught the people knowledge, and he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. Kohelet sought to find words of delight, and that which was written uprightly, words of truth. The words of the wise are as goads, and his nails well fastened are the words of the masters of assemblies, which are given by one shepherd. And more than these, my son, be admonished. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is a weariness of the flesh. This is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God, and keep his commandments, for this is the whole of man. For God will bring every work into judgment with every hidden thing, whether it be good or whether it be evil. All right, so this here at the end is an interesting kind of postscript, conclusion, epilogue. It feels a little bit separate from the rest of the text that we have been reading, almost like an address in the first person to this point, as if a person who is writing these words was addressing us, providing that wisdom directly to us. And here, even though, again, we are still kind of addressed in this way, these are not presented specifically as the words of Kohelet, the teacher, the preacher, the various translations for that term that you see in most English translations. These appear to be a final small postscript by someone who has compiled the writing of Kohelet. So as you read through this, he refers to the teacher and to Kohelet in the third person. More than being wise, Kohelet still taught the people, saying that he did those things unless I am telling you this thing. Are there other books in the Bible that function in this way or have this sort of element to them, where the writer of some of the book is actually a compiler of other people's writings?
Well, Luke does that, and so does Mark.
Okay, so there is some of that in the Gospels. Yeah, Luke in particular addresses his reader as if he was one who is collecting stories from other places, very specifically, and telling you about them. And in Acts, this is an excellent example, we see the difference in things that he has witnessed and things that he has heard in the way that he changes his pronouns and the way he describes things. He'll go from saying, they went to this place and did this thing, and start saying, we went to this place, indicating that he was actually present for some of it, though not all of it. Are there other places? Psalms comes to mind. Right? The book of Psalms has been compiled over a period of time. There are a number of different authors for the different Psalms that are within the book of Psalms. And so there is some of that, though there is less of a direct address from the compiler. You occasionally get notes at the Psalms and things like that. Ezra and Nehemiah have this quality too. They appear to be different collections of things about those two people. Now, they may have been collected by Ezra and Nehemiah, but from the way that those books flow, it doesn't appear that they wrote the entire thing themselves. And it could have been just one person. I think, it's not an Ezra and Nehemiah class, but I think in the Hebrew Bible, those are just considered a single book, if I remember correctly. They're essentially a single book of history talking about the post-exilic period after the Israelites return from Babylon and what happens. So this is not unique, this way of doing things. So there is a person, and again, given that there's the expectation maybe Ezra and Nehemiah collected things about themselves and then put it into this form, it could be Kohelet himself speaking of himself in the third person as a kind of literary device. Authors do this in different ways, and even still now. But at any rate, so not only was the teacher wise, but he imparts knowledge. What is this referring to? What is the difference between being wise and imparting knowledge in this way? No, I think that's great. You delved right to the heart of what I was going to get to in actually a couple steps. I think that there's a difference between what he's saying, actually his knowledge of wisdom that he has, and his practical application or his willingness to share that. You cut straight to the heart of the matter, which is very well done. I was going to say there's the fairly well-known joke, right? What's the difference between wisdom and knowledge? Knowledge is knowing that a tomato is a fruit, and wisdom is knowing it still doesn't go in a fruit salad. Right? There's a kind of a difference between just simply knowing a thing and then the application of a thing, but I'm not sure that that's what's actually being driven at here. But that the teacher didn't just accumulate wisdom for himself, that he went to the trouble of sharing that with other people and expressing that and putting his knowledge out into the world in different ways. And it talks about imparting it. He not only pondered and searched out, but he set in order proverbs for the benefit of others, right? And took the time to do writing as well. There's a difference and a value, in fact, even in having wisdom yourself, but that is a different thing from imparting that wisdom and knowledge to others, too. Both are useful and good things, but they are distinct things. Right? And it was important enough, I think, for the writer to draw that distinction. This is also a big part of why these few verses here, traditionally we've understood the writer to be Solomon. I don't know if anybody remembers the descriptions of Solomon that occur in the historical books earlier in Kings, books of Kings. Solomon is described as wise, where famously there's the story, he's used a lot in sermon illustrations of him, God appearing to him in a dream at the beginning of his reign, there's the word I want, beginning of his reign as king, and asking what he wants. And he chooses what? Wisdom, right? He chooses wisdom. And we think of wisdom, again, as having that almost moral component, right? Knowing what's suitable, knowing what's right, knowing what's proper. But he was also described as having immense amounts of knowledge, basic factual knowledge as well. That he learned things about the natural world. He knew things that people didn't know. He was, in the the shorthand that you hear kids say, he was the smartest man that ever lived, right? He had knowledge as well as wisdom, that he had this, I don't know, thirst or desire to learn things, but that he did actually, in fact, learn all sorts of things that were both practical and useful, and to a greater degree than others that had come before him or since, for a long time after. So, again, the knowledge, Proverbs. Proverbs is generally considered to be mostly the work of whom? The book of Proverbs in the Bible. Solomon. So again, another element of this. Kohelet is one searching out and publishing, making known Proverbs. It's just another element in trying to argue that the writer or the primary author of Ecclesiastes would also be Solomon. All right, so after crediting him in 9 and 10, there's a shift, again, from speaking specifically about Kohelet and his qualities to more general elements about the knowledge itself. Verse 11, the words of the wise are like goads. Their collected sayings like firmly embedded nails. What is a goad? A prod, okay. Yeah, it's usually it was a tool to make an animal move. Yeah. Generally, they were kind of long, pointy sticks, and they operate on the principle of this doesn't feel good, so you should move and try and get out of the way. And it becomes a very kind of vivid metaphor for the words of the wise. How are the words of the wise like a goad, or goads, each one being a goad? How does that work?
Push you to behave in a specific way.
They push you, yeah, we say that we're pushed, right? Again, metaphorically, there's no physical element to it. But why do we say they push us to behave in a certain way? What is it that actually pushes? Okay, our conscience, yeah. But there's kind of a concept, I'm sorry, I'm not being clear with my question, but
Social norms?
social norms, we feel bad. They're supposed to make you feel bad. The words of the wise make you unhappy. The words of the wise make you feel a little upset. The words of the wise make you feel ashamed. The words of the wise are really uncomfortable. They're a goad. All these elements are supposed to be kind of bound up in that. That when you hear truth spoken to you, it is supposed to draw clearly for you the contrast between how you should be and how you actually are, so that you will move from how you are to how you should be. It takes in that element of, I don't like it. This is uncomfortable. It's not supposed to necessarily always be a comfort. Some words of wisdom are comforting, but they can also function as a thing for discomfort. Because if we get too comfortable with where we're at in the way that we are, with that kind of lethargy, that sloth that prevents us from trying to be more like God, those words of wisdom come along and poke you hard enough to make you feel bad about the way that you've been behaving or the things that you've not been doing, to get you up out of the rut that you're in and move you along to where you should be. It's uncomfortable. It's supposed to not be comfortable. This is the I should have looked up exactly where it was, but it just occurred to me. This is what Saul talks about when he refers to in one of his letters, I believe, about the appearance of Christ. Is that what it was? Why is it that you kick against the goads? The question, the rhetorical question there is, why is it that you resist what I am prodding you to do? Right? And the metaphor is even more fully drawn out of an animal that is being prodded with the sharp stick to get it to move, to get it to change course, whatever it needs to do. And the reaction it has, sometimes animals will, is instead of moving, they kick. Right? They kick back, trying to stop it from, leave me alone, knock it off. And the metaphor again continues that it's not going to stop. Why do you persist in resisting this futile resistance against this prodding of your conscience?
Well, all of this book is really based on that. That's what Solomon's trying to get across.
Sure. Yeah, the book itself is largely this prodding, right? That people are going to get stuck in these incorrect places or going in these incorrect directions. They are pursuing wealth as a means of obtaining purpose in their life, or they're seeking after pleasure as a way of trying to derive purpose. And the words in Ecclesiastes are supposed to serve, as it says here, as those goads to prod you back onto the right path. To forget about doing it that way, to go back and do it the right way. He immediately pivots, though, into a different metaphor. Verse 11, their collected sayings are like firmly embedded nails. What does that mean? They don't move easily. Okay. They're not going to change. Yeah. Wisdom is eternal. Yeah.
Well-driven nail doesn't bend, it goes all the way in, pierces deeply.
Right. It cuts in all the way as far as, to the base of it, right? It sinks in to the very heart of the wood. Yeah. By pivoting the metaphor, we get the idea again that these things are immovable. Right? Wisdom is not something that alters. The truth of God is not something different now than it was then. And I've belabored this point, of course, when I probably taught a class on Hebrews, but there is continuity between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Because God himself is eternal and unchanging. Right? The God who created the world is the same God that gave the law to the Israelites, is the same God who sent the prophets to remind them of their responsibilities, is the same God who sent his Son to redeem everyone, and is the same God that demands and commands our allegiance today. That, thinking that you have to be up to date in your morals is as silly as thinking that, right and wrong are one thing at 10 a.m. and something else at 3 in the afternoon. The famous C.S. Lewis metaphor. Neither the calendar nor the clock defines morality, and these words of wisdom are just as immovable. They're just as unchanging. They're just as firmly fixed. Then he says they're given by one shepherd. Who's that? Jesus, famously the shepherd. Did Copeland know who Jesus was?
Well, as much as they could through what was passed down about the coming granting of the promises God gave Adam and Eve. They passed that down, so they would have known it was coming.
Right. The Messiah was coming and they would have known this. But Jesus isn't the only figure of the Godhead, the Trinity, that the shepherd is used of, right? Necessarily. Or it really doesn't matter when you're speaking of God to always draw a distinction. This is the delightful paradox of the Trinity, that God is both God, one and only God, and figured in three persons, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. You look at Psalm 23, right? How does that begin? Who remembers? Psalm 23 starts, the Lord is my shepherd. Right? This is an idea that they understood, that was well known to David and to Solomon, to the Israelites, that God is a good shepherd who cares for his people in the way that a shepherd cares for his flock. Right? And sometimes a good shepherd takes that crook, that staff, and gives you a good whack with it. You get a goad. But it comes from a place when you realize that metaphor, when you have absorbed this the way that they have seen this act, that goad is strictly for the benefit of the person, the sheep here in this metaphor, being goaded. There's one shepherd, there's one person directing the flock, there's one person who is the source of wisdom, and that is the Lord. That is where it all comes and derives from. All right. Wisdom. So these several verses on the nature of wisdom. I don't want to skip on too quickly in my eagerness again to get to the end of the book today, but other thoughts on these first couple verses, 9, 10, 11, before we move on to 12, 13, 14. I want to prevent anyone from casting pearls up here in front of this swine that's teaching up. Maybe I'm mixing my metaphors a little. Yeah?
It says they're given by one shepherd, Jesus. And it kind of sounds like he's saying that all wisdom comes from. It doesn't matter what men say, really. You have a lot of opinions and a lot of proverbs, but what really matters is what Jesus says.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. There are both ways of kind of twisting that idea, both facets of it that are there, that all of these things are actually from God. But then anything that is true has ultimately got its source in the Lord. Right? That God is the God of love, he is entirely love. That God is the God of truth, he is entirely true. There's nothing false about him. And so anything that is true derives in some way from that nature of God.
This is an abrupt conclusion, though.
It is a little bit of an abrupt conclusion, yeah.
Yeah, he spent all of his time talking about what is lost, what is not valuable on earth, without really mentioning, occasionally would mention God, occasionally. And then you come down to the last 12 verses or so, and suddenly it's like he's really ending it quick.
Yeah, that's an excellent segue into this last little bit. I'm going to jump over 12 real quickly into 13, where he does say that essentially. It's a very quick summary. All has been heard. Here's the conclusion. Fear God and keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. Which, as an explication of what we ought to do, as you know, is very, very short when weighed up against the list of things that come before in Ecclesiastes, where he goes into detail about this is not a good idea, and this doesn't have any meaning, this is worthless, and this is a waste of your time. Why would he do it this way?
So the value. There's only one answer.
There's only one answer. Yeah.
And it doesn't take a whole lot of explanation.
Who was the original audience for this book? Now, I know I have spent a lot of time throughout this whole class saying that this book is it is an invaluable tool for the reaching of those who are not saved, the unchurched, the lost, because it has resonance in the way that it talks about the ultimate lack of fulfillment in things like trying to achieve power or money or worldly success, and how none of that will last. And that can resonate with someone who even yet has not come to a belief in God. So who was the original audience for this? It's not your question. Yeah. The Israelites. The Israelites. And what did the Israelites know better than any of the other nations around them? God, yeah. Yeah. They didn't need the law laid out again. They have the Pentateuch. They have the Torah. They have a lot of the prophets. They have the law. So this is intended in some way, I think, to be kind of a counterweight or the other side of the coin for them. All these things that you already know him to have heard about God, that is the only way. This is why he can sum up so quickly.
Well, I think this is also written out of frustration. When you read through it, it's almost like he was frustrated with the Israelites come and went to God. And they were punished every time.
Sure.
But it's almost like being over it all and being able to see it all and what the people were doing.
Sure.
It was like, kind of wrote this out of frustration. They just didn't get it sometimes.
Sure. Well, and again, they didn't get it, and they go through it over and over, which is what he talks about at the very beginning of the book, that everything old will be new again, and vice versa, that everything runs in a circle. The water flows from the rivers to the sea and goes back to where it started and just starts all over again. And this is an attempt to try and short-circuit that process. Since you're going to come along and you're going to think that you're going to find satisfaction and fulfillment in chasing after money, and it's not going to work. I'm telling you, it's not going to work. And so he can sum up at the end by saying, look, I've explained all these things that don't work. This is the way the world functions. You need to just go back to what you already know. Fear God, keep his commandments. You have all those written down. Moses already did this for you hundreds of years ago. Go back to what you already know. Return to that which you know. And we can't, of course, if we're using this as an evangelistic tool, sum up that way quite the same way, necessarily. But we can then step from that and say, well, what does this mean? How does this go? And move into, what does God command? What is the message of the gospel? What does this mean for someone who is looking for hope? If all these things are worthless and without value, if none of this will provide you with satisfaction and meaning, what will? And here's the link at the end of the book that we can use to bridge that gap. This is the conclusion of what he has examined. Fear God, keep his commandments. This is the whole duty of man. And then he gives a promise and a warning in the very final verse. For God will bring every deed into judgment, including every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. No getting away from it. I know I've talked about this before, and I'll talk about it again now, and I'm sure I'll say this at some other point while I'm standing in front of a group of people. Right? That Pascalian idea that the way the world works is that we are all of us rushing headlong towards an abyss. We're racing towards our own demise. And so much of the world is constantly trying to distract themselves, right, as Pascal says, and put things in front of their eyes that they will not see what is coming. Right? And this is tearing away the veil. There is an end coming, and there will be a judgment. God will know. And everything will be exposed, nothing will be hidden. And we will all have to face up to that. Again, thanks be to God, we have Jesus to prevent us from having to suffer the consequences of the lives that we have led. This also is a link back to what he has talked about in terms of things having meaning. Right? Because he talks about all the things that don't have value, all the things that won't have lasting permanence, all the things that don't have any lasting meaning. The things that we build, the children that we have, the money that we accumulate, the experiences, the things that we enjoy, none of that will last, none of that will provide meaning. But here he talks about the thing that will, or things. Right? It is our virtue or our lack thereof that echoes into eternity. Right? It is the morality of our lives that has permanence. Those are the things that actually do end up lasting. Those moral choices. The moral dimension of our lives carries through. All right, I'm going to go back to 12. Because 12 is just a fun verse. Be warned, my son, of anything in addition to them, speaking of the words of the wise, of making many books there is no end, and much study wearies the body. This is the sort of verse that when you're in college, right, you print that out, stick it on your bulletin board right in front of where you study. It's kind of as an ironic joke to keep you going. What is he trying to say with this, though? I mean, it is amusing. It's a fun verse to quote at people graduating from high school, et cetera, et cetera. But what is he trying to say with this? Yeah.
This is the most important thing there is. Everything you need is there, and to continue studying what is right and what's beneficial, and all the rest of it, many philosophies, we've written many words to all of them. Continuing to search. You don't need to search anymore. You've got the whole word. Don't confound it with a lot of other garbage that people continue with.
Yeah, there's a risk, certainly, in trying to add to the things that are true and wise that are already known, and you can end up talking yourself into all kinds of strange contortions and circles when you...
Well, if you go down to the University of Higher Learning and you listen long enough, you completely depart from what's said in the beginning here from the shepherd. If you listen too much.
Yeah. One of the better philosophical notions that I think I've ever run across was, of course, Socrates talking about the only thing that he was really sure of was that he really didn't know much of anything. That this humility in the face of the vastness of who God is, our own inability to truly understand and appreciate this sort of thing is really kind of the beginning of this wisdom, where we put ourselves in that position to learn, to understand, to try and take that in from what God has given to us and revealed, rather than making the more strenuous effort ourselves to set ourselves up as a fountain of wisdom and knowledge.
To speak more specifically about the comment I made, I think that it's fine to continue on studying about the life of Jesus and the Word that came down, and God's ways and all that, and to find supporting evidence if you can, and archaeological findings, and all that sort of thing would lead to strengthening your position about the beliefs that come from God. I think this speaks to the looking for something else, searching for more, continue to study to see if there's something out there besides what's contained in God's message. Don't get off on some of these philosophies and arguments that some put forth that, hey, this is a better way, this is the truth, this isn't so much the truth. Stay away.
Yeah, it serves as a warning in several respects. Yeah, and then regardless of how far we ever pursue things, we will never know it all. Right? There is no end to this sort of thing, and you end up just wearing yourself out eventually. There's never a conclusion. All right. I don't know that I have a grand peroration to wrap everything up in a very inspiring kind of way, but Ecclesiastes, a fantastic wisdom-filled book. Any final thoughts on everything as a whole, or the last few verses that we talked about here before we conclude our study of Ecclesiastes? This is your last chance. We won't entertain comments on Ecclesiastes. No, that's not true. That's not true. You can talk about Ecclesiastes anytime. If it just occurs to you 3 weeks from now, you can pop up with a comment. Yes, ma'am?
I don't know the word to use. It bothers me that it's written by the wisest man in the world. And then I also think it's appropriate, I guess.
I'm not sure I quite understand.
Yeah, the despair that's in so much of it.
Oh.
You know, written by the wisest man in the world. We should have known all the happy, do all the right things, all the happy.
Well, that's an interesting point. There is, that we can look at it and think, if the wisest man in the world didn't, have it all figured out and couldn't feel happy about it, what does that mean for us? On the other hand, it can be very hopeful, in fact, right? Because he talks about, too, that wisdom is better than foolishness, right? It's better than light is than darkness. But it doesn't actually make you that happy. He says, being smart, not all it's cracked up to be. Seems like an odd way to conclude things here, but I guess I will. There's a great movie with Jimmy Stewart called Harvey, where he has a 6'3" rabbit or whatever it is that no one else can see. Anyways, at one point in the movie, he is talking to someone, and he says, "My mother once told me that in this world you must be either oh so smart or oh so pleasant. I tried smart, I recommend pleasant." And a big part of that idea, I think, is here in Ecclesiastes, right? That you can be the smartest person ever and oh so wise, and really you're better off being kind and virtuous and loving and focusing on those things than trying to increase your store of wisdom and knowledge at every turn, right? That people mistake the purpose of what they're here to do and be, right, for things that they accumulate for themselves, whether it's money or power or wisdom. And really what we are here to do is to serve God and serve others. And that way leads to much, much greater fulfillment. All right. Well, I have bent your ear long enough with my talking this morning. That wraps up Ecclesiastes. We will do something different next week. Thank you all very much for your time and your attention. I appreciate it.